Greetings, this is iVideo. My name is John Savers, I'm your host, and today we start a small series of perhaps 3 or 4 episodes on the subject of race. I have decided to do this for purposes of clarification. I did notice some feedback from a program series celebration in which there seems to be some confusion and misunderstanding on this subject. I used the expression in that program that I was not concerned if I were described as a racist, that it did not bother me if I were called a racist. The reason for this being that I understood very well that there was this confusion and that it would be an inevitable result of the present situation. But I would like to say that there is a distinction between my saying that I was not concerned about being called a racist and being a racist. But at any rate, there is that problem, plus the correlation that some make between this term and hatred. And I just wanted to bring forth the notion that when one observes the matter of race, it's not a matter of hatred, and there is a certain sort of adage, a kind of a poetic expression, not that I love thee less, but my own more. I don't think that this concept is too current, but at any rate, to get to the bottom line, I have decided to take a look at this series, because the fact of the matter is that when I take a look at a Chinese gentleman or an American Indian gentleman or an African gentleman, I see these people as belonging to separate races. I do not take any kind of a qualitative measure other than the observation that this is so. But this is taken to be something of a heresy in present contemporary society. Well, don't flip your wigs here, but let us take a look at this piece. This information may seem controversial to some, but it is worth noting. Mutations are rare. A normal spontaneous mutation rate for a single gene would be 1 mutation in every 1 million to 100 million replications. Because of this, geneticists claim that the gene is very stable. In other words, the general tendency of heredity is to maintain the genetic structure as is. Of the mutations that do occur in a gene, the vast majority would be harmful, as explained in one biology text. If you were to take a Swiss watch, remove its back, and make some random change in its parts, the chances are very great that you would make it run worse rather than better. A random change in any delicate and intricate mechanism is far more likely to damage it than to improve it. Mutational changes in genes being random, it is easy to understand why the vast majority of new mutations are deleterious, that is, injurious. The Origin of Race and Civilization, pages 15-16, Charles A. Wiseman, citing Keaton, Biological Sciences, 3rd edition, 1980, page 605. But folks, that's not all. They seldom make themselves even known. The chances of a gene mutation surviving are very small, as it would take between 1,000 and 1,000,000 generations to replace completely the original gene. Because these type of mutations have a slight effect, they are recessive, which means that the trait that is produced in the gene by mutation is genetically hidden and will disappear with succeeding generations. This was demonstrated by Gregor Mendel's genetic experiments in breeding pea plants in 1865. What Mendel called the principle of dominance works to cover up and flush out a recessive trait. A small and often individually insignificant mutation can become dominant only where there is no contrasting dominant trait to oppose it. Genetic variations do occur within a species. Many of these are the result of modifier genes which, for example, can cause a variation in spotting of beagle dogs. There can also be significant variations in height, weight, shape, coloration, immunity to diseases, eye color, etc. But variations, whether caused by mutations or modifier genes, never have been found to produce anything other than the species to which they originally belonged. The general tendency of heredity and the genetic blueprint of life, DNA, is to perpetuate a species unchanged. One of the most rigid and uncompromising laws in nature is the fixity of the species, the retaining of specific characteristics. Natural selection itself is a major factor which acts to limit and stabilize genetic diversity. This is from The Origin of Race and Civilization, page 16, Charles A. Wiseman, citing in part Keaton, Supra, page 595. Now, it is sometimes said that the evolutionary process is aided by the mating or crossbreeding of closely related species, which is a circumstance which it is claimed increases genetic frequencies and makes for a generally salubrious environment. However, it must be said that mutations and hybridity are not things which are congenial to nature, apparently, and do not occur without some drawbacks. Well, let's take a look at this. The naturalist, Dr. Pritchard, states the following regarding hybridity of species. Nothing is more evident than the fact that all the tribes, both of the animal and vegetable worlds, are generally reproduced and perpetuated without becoming blended and mixed together. The law of nature decrees that creatures of every kind shall increase and multiply by propagating their own kind and not any other. The existence of such a law as this in the economy of nature is almost self-evident, or at least becomes evident from the most superficial and general survey of the phenomena of the living world. For if, as some have argued, there were no such principle in operation, how could the order and at the same time the variety of the animal and vegetable creation be preserved? But although hybrid plants are produced, there are no hybrid races. This is a fact now universally admitted among botanists. It seems that nature has prevented the perpetuation of such productions by a variety of organic defects. This is from The Origin of Race and Civilization, page 17, Charles A. Wiseman, citing James C. Pritchard, M.D., The Natural History of Man, Volume 1, London, 1855, pages 11 through 13. And furthermore, please consider the renowned zoologist Blumenbach refutes the idea that different species arose from hybridization. By a most wise law of nature, by which the infinite confusion of specific forms is guarded against, hybrids of this kind, especially in the animal kingdom, scarcely ever occur except through the interference of man. And then they are almost invariably sterile, so as to be unable to propagate any further their new ambiguous shape sprung from anomalous venery, that is, intercourse. If hybridity was as certain in nature as evolutionists claim, this would not cause a diversity of species, but rather a reduction in diversity, as each type in a genus is gradually amalgamated, producing a homogeneous population. Now, this is from The Origin of Race and Civilization, Charles A. Wiseman, citing Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, on the Natural Varieties of Mankind, London, 1865, page 195. And now please consider the following carefully, as it does have future relevance. A modern biology textbook further explains the problems of hybridity in regards to the evolutionary process. Hybrid inviability. Hybrids are often weak and malformed and frequently die before they reproduce. Hence, there is no actual gene flow through them from the gene pool of one parental species to the gene pool of the other parental species. An example of hybrids in viability is seen in certain tobacco hybrids, which form tumors in their vegetative parts and die before they flower. This is from The Origin of Race and Civilization, Charles A. Wiseman, page 18, citing Keaton. That's William J. Keaton. A Biological Science, 3rd edition, 1980, page 800. Now, all this being so, it is, I think, of interest and in the same vein to consider this. Nature has a way of preventing cross-mating between species and rejecting the hybrids that do occur. As Pritchard stated, there are no hybrid races in nature. Jeffreys stated, the offspring of the Anglo-Saxon and Negro, though prolific for a time, will run out when kept apart from the vital or paramount stock, the primitive type. The history of the races fully attests this fact. Hybridity is confined to individuals. It does not extend to nations. This is from The Origin of Species and Civilization, page 18, Charles A. Wiseman, citing John P. Jeffreys, The Natural History of the Human Races, page 355. Now, I'd like you to take judicial notice, so to speak, of the fact that although I don't have citations to offer at this time, over the years there have been many citations in the media, such as the Washington Post and so forth, in regard to the health problems to be found within the black community. And in comparative measurements, it seems that black men have a shortened lifespan relative to white men and are subject to many more diseases. A similar comparison rests between black women and white women. Now, frequently it is brought forth that the reasons for this are environmental, psychological, economic, and so forth. There is an attempt, generally speaking, to place a certain guilt upon the white population as being the real source of the health problems of the black community. But if, in fact, the problem is one of hybridization, then I think that this should be discussed and brought to the fore, because if it is, it's not really something which can be cured by the measures now proposed and measures enacted in the past with little or no results. Therefore, I think it is well worth considering. In an etymological dictionary, we find the following under race. Race, 2, a family, a tribe, a people, whence racial, probably Latin ratio, a species, and 3, race, a root, see radical. In addition, in the same vein, race, from the French race, from the Italian raza, Spanish raza, a race, a ray, and res, a root, Latin radix, Russian rod, a generation, race, roju, to beget. The primary sense of the root is to thrust or shoot. The Latin radius and radius have the same original. This word coincides in origin with rod, ray, radiate, etc. 1. The lineage of a family, a continued series of descendants from a parent who is called the stock. A race is a series of descendants indefinitely. Now, it may be said that I think Mr. Alex Haley was probably trying to get at this in his book, Roots. But at any rate, furthermore, let's consider this. A race not only has reference to the root or original stock, but also to the entire lineage, which shoots or radiates from the root like a rod or a ray. Race thus means the descendants or generations from a root stock. Therefore, race must indicate a species when there is no adulteration in the lineage that radiates from the root stock. When we thus refer to the Adamic race, it means all the generations that have proceeded from the root stock of Adam and Eve. Now, I'd like at this point in time to put some items on the board to perhaps make this all a little clearer, some schematics, some images. It has long been debated whether the various types of man represent one species, with the different types being mere varieties, or if they represent many species. With scientific evidence that indicates a high antiquity of man, along with evidence of definite anatomical differences, there developed a firmly held belief that many ancestral human pairs were created, each differing externally and internally in a way which allowed them to be classified differently. So when the Hottentots and Bushmen were discovered, their appearance and language, which the European explorers considered to be like the chatter of monkeys, caused them to be placed in a lower category, nearly subhuman. Now let's put on the board this picture, this comparison, so that the public will understand a little bit more clearly the problem. Now, people, it seems that the weight of scientific evidence leans in the direction quite clearly of classification of humans into various species. And on this particular note, Professor Hankins has something to say, which I would like you now to be able to see. So please consider. In the first place, it is not demonstrated that all varieties of men belong to the same species. It is generally agreed that, for example, Homo neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens represent different species. Moreover, the greatest discoveries in this field still remain to be made. This alone should make one wary of such loose reasoning as the following: all men belong to the same species, and hence all are equal. The old theory of interspecific sterility has broken down. There are cases of intraspecific sterility among plants, and many animals are classed in different species and even different genera, though mutually fertile on crossing. It is true, as Darwin declared in The Descent of Man, that the varieties of mankind are so distinct that similar differences found in any other animal would warrant their classification in different species, if not different genera. Whatever rules and standards we apply in classifying animals and plants into species, there is no reason that they should not be used to classify man. The species of birds are in a greater measure distinguished by the form, structure, and arrangement of the feathers. The scales of fishes have such an intimate and unvarying relation to their organs and systems that Professor Agassiz has been able to delineate accurately the form and structure of an extinct species from the examination of a single scale. And the classification of these animals is chiefly made according to the structure of the scales. If such differences in animals constitute specific and even generic distinctions, why not, by analogy, in man? The Origin of Race and Civilization, pages 85-86, citing in part Frank H. Hankins, The Racial Basis of Civilization, 1926, pages 292-93, Smith and Neeland, Natural History of the Human Species, 1851, page 89. And additionally, and importantly in this vein, please consider. The fact that exact lines of distinction cannot always be drawn in the races of man has no validity for their classification as one species. The evolutionist Ernst Haeckel had divided the genus Homo into 12 species, each of which he divided into varieties, making in all 36 races. He thought the differences between the races of man as commonly accepted are as great or greater than the differences between species as recognized by botanists and zoologists. He quotes Kuhnstedt as saying, "If Negroes and Caucasians were snails, zoologists would universally agree that they represented two very excellent species, which could never have originated from one pair by gradual divergence." We need to realize that God did not make man out of different materials from that of plants and animals. All are made out of the dust of the ground. The difference lies in the way the Creator arranged these materials, and therefore the same basic biological principles apply. The great encyclopedist and philosopher Voltaire had written in Chapter 1 of his work, The Elements of Newton's Philosophy, that it appears that Americans, Negroes, and Laplanders are not descended from the first man. The inner constitutions of the internal organs of the Negroes is evident demonstration of this. Voltaire was convinced that the differential characteristics of the human races are hereditary and immutable, and affirmed that Hottentots, Laplanders, Chinese, and Americans are completely different races. This is from The Origin of Race and Species, page 87, citing G. Dallas Lind, The Marvelous Story of Man, 1900, page 197. I think the following images will help you understand what these scientists are getting at. And I'd also like you to consider the following. One of the most comprehensive and researched scientific studies on race and anthropology has been carried out by Dr. Topinard, who made the following conclusions on the races of man. Is the human family composed of genera, of species, or varieties? Between the various species of anthropoid apes, between those of the genus chimpanzee, for example, the differences are less pronounced than between the principal human races. Between the orangutan and the gorilla, there is less distance than between the Australian and the Laplander. We cannot say more. The distinctive characteristics of the jackal and the dog, the wolf and the fox, the horse and the mule, the zebra and the quagga, the camel and the dromedary are scarcely more divergent and are frequently less than those of our human types. The blonde Swede with fair, rosy complexion, light blue eyes, slender figure, orthognathous face, and large cranial capacity is at a prodigious distance from the Negro with the sooty black complexion, the yellow sclerotic eyes, the short and woolly hair, the prominent muzzle, and the projecting turned-up lips. The anatomical and physiological contrast between human types are greater than those admitted by naturalists between varieties and as great as between species. The interval appears even to be greater in some cases and to extend to that of genera. Thus, the four characters which distinguish the goat from the sheep are no other than those which separate certain great branches of the human family. To sum up, the human family, the first of the order of primates, is composed of species, or fundamental human races. This is from The Origin of Race and Civilization, page 88, citing Paul Topinard, Anthropology, 1878, pages 506 through 511. Well, that will conclude this episode of the initial series, this small series on the matter of race, in which we try to look at this matter from a scientific perspective and from a detached, unemotional perspective. We will also put this in great contrast with contemporary views in regard to the advisability of creating a universal man, a homo blindo, and we contrast that aim with the views of these important figures in natural history from the past, and why they think that such a being would be a hybrid and would be inherently weak and might indeed mean the extinction of all mankind. On that particular note, I will say adieu. We do hope you'll tune in next time. And until that time, this is iVideo. My name is John Savers, and thank you for tuning in.